How did a 20-year-old youth conquer the known world in just 13 years, forging a path from Greece to India? We are talking about Alexander the Great, a name that has become synonymous with the word conqueror. In 13 years of continuous campaigns, he never lost a single major battle. He founded over 70 cities, most of which he named after himself. But was this purely a story of military genius and tactical calculation? Or was it the chronicle of a man driven by an idea that would seem like madness to us today? This is the story of a clash between superhuman ambition and brutal reality, of a mind that genuinely believed in its own divine mission. This is not just the conquest of territory, it is the conquest of the very idea of what it means to be human. Today, we won't just recite the dry dates of his victories. We will dissect the psychology of this man. We will trace the 5 turning points that transformed an ambitious Macedonian prince into a figure some considered a liberator, others a tyrant, and still others a living god. We will begin with the whispers in his childhood bedroom, where his mother, Olympias, instilled in him the idea that his real father was not King Philip, but Zeus himself. We will witness his tactical triumph that brought the greatest empire of the East to its knees. And we will reach the breaking point, a river in India where his own loyal army, for the first time, would tell him no. Let's begin. To understand how a man decides to conquer the entire world, you have to go back to his childhood. And Alexander's childhood was the Macedonian royal court. This was no place for the weak. It was a boiling cauldron of ambition, conspiracy, magic, and poison. His father, King Philip II, was a brilliant general and a ruthless politician who had united Greece by force. But he was also a man of coarse habits, prone to drunkenness and numerous marriages. And his mother, Olympias, was an Epirot princess, proud, incredibly jealous, and deeply immersed in mystical cults. She was a priestess of the Dionysian mysteries and, according to rumor, slept surrounded by tamed snakes. The relationship between Philip and Olympias was a catastrophe. They hated each other, and young Alexander was caught in the very center of this psychological war. It was in this toxic environment that the central myth of his life was born. Olympias, realizing that Philip had grown cold toward her and might name a son from another wife as his heir, made her move. She began to instill in young Alexander an idea that would define his entire destiny. The legend, which she either created herself or genuinely believed, was this: Philip was not his real father. On the night before her wedding, she dreamed that a lightning bolt struck her womb, and from it, a great fire erupted. Later, she would claim that Zeus himself had come to her chambers in the form of a serpent, and that Alexander was not just a prince, but a demigod, the son of the supreme Olympian. Now, let's break down what this means for a child. Imagine, your father is the most powerful man you know, but your mother tells you that you are the son of a god. This creates an incredible internal conflict and at the same time, colossal ambition. It removes all psychological barriers. If you are the son of a king, your ceiling is inheriting the throne. But if you are the son of Zeus, your ceiling is the entire world. For Alexander, the question of his own identity was settled in childhood. His destiny was not merely to rule, his destiny was to be equal to the gods. This belief became the core of his personality and his primary driving force. When his father, Philip, fell during a drunken argument while trying to draw his sword, Alexander reportedly scoffed, "Look, here is the man who is preparing to cross from Europe to Asia, and he cannot even cross from one couch to another?" Even then, he did not see his father as an equal. He had to prove to the world, and perhaps to himself, that his mother was right. By 331 BC, Alexander had already crushed the Persian armies twice, at the Granicus and at Issus. He had liberated Egypt, where the priests unhesitatingly proclaimed him the son of the god Amun, which only strengthened his belief in Olympias's myth. But the Persian Empire, stretching across 3 continents, was still alive. King Darius III, who had fled from Alexander at Issus, was not about to surrender. He gathered all the forces of his vast realm for one decisive battle. Darius personally chose the theater for the coming fight, a wide plain near the village of Gaugamela, which he ordered to be further cleared and leveled. He had it prepared, ordering all stones and bushes removed, so that his ultimate weapon, 200 scythed chariots, could tear the Macedonian phalanx to shreds. Darius put everything on the line. Ancient sources, wanting to emphasize the grandeur of the victory, speak of an army of 1,000,000 men. While this is most likely a fantastic exaggeration, even by the most conservative estimates, the Persians had overwhelming numerical superiority, perhaps up to 250,000 warriors against Alexander's 47,000. On October 1, 331 BC, the armies met. Darius arranged his troops in a classic formation, a strong center with cavalry on the flanks. Alexander, however, employed one of the most brilliant tactics in history. He shifted his right flank, as if leading it away, and ordered it to advance at an angle to the Persian line. Darius, fearing the Macedonians would move beyond the plain he had prepared, sent his cavalry to intercept. This was exactly what Alexander had been waiting for. As soon as the Persian cavalry surged sideways, a gap opened in the center of their battle line. At that very moment, Alexander reformed his elite cavalry, the companions, into a wedge formation and personally led a suicidal charge straight into that gap, aiming not just for the army's center, but for Darius III himself. Let's analyze this maneuver. This wasn't just tactical calculation, it was pure psychology. Alexander understood that the Persian Empire was an autocracy, held together by one man. Break the linchpin, and the entire structure will collapse. The scythed chariots on which Darius had counted so heavily were neutralized by the Macedonian infantry, who simply opened their ranks, let them pass through, and then struck the drivers from the sides. And when Darius saw the wedge of Macedonian cavalry, led by Alexander himself, charging straight at him through the dust and chaos, his nerve broke. Just as at Issus, he turned his chariot and fled. The moment the soldiers saw their king running, panic seized the entire massive army. The battle turned into a slaughter. After Gaugamela, the Achaemenid Empire effectively ceased to exist. Alexander was proclaimed King of Asia. There is a popular myth, partly created by Roman historians, that divides Alexander's world into 2 parts: the civilized Greeks and the savage barbarians whom he conquered with fire and sword. In this worldview, Alexander is simply a brilliant but cruel general who destroyed the great Persian Empire. But this image misses the most important point. The truth is far more complex and interesting. Immediately after Gaugamela, Alexander begins to do something no one expected, least of all his own Macedonian soldiers. He doesn't just overthrow Darius, he begins to become Darius himself. He doesn't destroy the Persian system of governance, he takes it over. He begins to wear elements of Persian royal attire, introduces Persian court rituals, and, most scandalously, demands proskinesis, the act of bowing to the ground, which for the Greeks was appropriate only before the gods. The culmination of this new policy comes in 324 BC, at the famous Susa Weddings. This was not just a celebration, it was a massive political act. Alexander, already married to the Bactrian princess Roxana, takes 2 more wives at once, the daughters of Darius and his predecessor. But he doesn't stop there. He orders 80 of his highest-ranking commanders and 10,000 of his common Macedonian soldiers to marry Persian women, staging a grand collective ceremony. This changes the game forever. He is literally trying to fuse 2 civilizations, Hellenic and Persian, by force, creating a new ruling elite. He is no longer the king of Macedon. He is the king of Asia, and this new empire must stand on 2 legs. Now, let's break down why he did this. Was it a manifestation of megalomania, as many of his comrades believed, or was it cold pragmatism? Most likely, it was both. Alexander, educated by Aristotle, genuinely believed in the superiority of Hellenic culture. But unlike his teacher, he saw the Persians not as mere slaves, but as an ancient and complex civilization that could be assimilated, not just conquered. He understood that governing such a gigantic territory with only Macedonian garrisons was impossible. He needed the loyalty of the local elite. But his army, the men who had shed blood for 10 years to defeat the Persians, saw this as a betrayal. They couldn't understand why his king was turning into the barbarian they had just overthrown. This cultural conflict would become a ticking bomb, set to explode at the very edge of the world. After the fall of Persia and the death of Darius, it would seem the mission was accomplished. But not for Alexander. He's obsessed with the idea of reaching the edge of the world, the great ocean that, according to Greek understanding, washed the eastern shores of Asia. His army, having already marched thousands of miles, invades India, and here they face a completely new type of warfare. This is no longer a battle against Persian infantry on open plains. This is war in the jungle during the monsoon season against new, unseen enemies. The culmination of this horror is the battle on the Hydaspes River against King Porus. The Macedonians win, but this victory comes at a terrible price. For the first time, they face war elephants in battle, 200 giant tanks that trample the phalanx, goring soldiers with their tusks and snatching them with their trunks. It's terrifying, but it works. Alexander's army is morally broken. They won, but the limit of their human endurance had been reached. The army reaches the next great river, the Hyphasis, and here the soldiers learn that what awaits them beyond this river is not the edge of the world. Beyond it lies the vast and powerful Nanda Empire, the Ganges Valley, which, according to rumors, has an even larger army than that of Porus and thousands more war elephants. At this moment, the unthinkable happens. The army that had followed its god king unquestioningly for 11 years stops. This isn't just fatigue, it's an open mutiny. The soldiers refuse to go any further. Alexander, the son of Zeus, exhorts, threatens, pleads. He locks himself in his tent for 3 days, expecting the soldiers to come to their senses. But they do not come. For the first time, Alexander's will was shattered by the will of his men. After 11 years of non-stop campaigning, the soldiers considered their duty fulfilled. They wanted to go home. Now let's break down why this happened. This was not just a rebellion born of exhaustion. It was a fundamental schism in objectives. The soldiers had gone on this campaign to get revenge on the Persians and to get rich. They had accomplished their task. However, Alexander was on a campaign driven by his divine mission to unite East and West and to reach the edge of the Okeumene, the inhabited world. But, as we saw in the last module, his policy of fusing civilizations and his transformation into a Persian monarch were incomprehensible to them. They no longer recognized their king. They did not want to conquer India for an empire where they would have to live side by side with the barbarians they had defeated. The mutiny on the Hyphasis is the moment when the divine ambition of one man collided with the collective human reality of his army. And reality won. Alexander was forced to give the order to turn back. Alexander returns to Babylon, which he has made the capital of his new empire. He is broken by the mutiny on the Hyphasis, but not defeated. His spirit cannot tolerate inaction. He has survived betrayal and the death of his closest friend, Hephaestion, but his divine mission is not yet over. He immediately begins planning new campaigns, the conquest of the Arabian Peninsula, a campaign against Carthage and the Western Mediterranean. He is still the son of Zeus, but now he knows the limits of human strength. However, he was not fated to test the limits of his own life. In 323 BC, in the midst of preparations for the Arabian campaign, the 32-year-old conqueror suddenly falls ill. It all begins after a long banquet. Alexander develops a raging fever. He grows weaker by the day. The greatest general, who never lost a battle and never received a mortal wound in dozens of fights, is dying in his bed in Babylon. The cause is still debated: malaria, typhoid, liver failure, or even a sophisticated poisoning. His empire, held together solely by his will, froze. His wife, Roxana, was pregnant, but there was no legitimate adult heir. His generals, the Diadochi, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, Perdiccas, gathered at his deathbed. They asked the final, most important question: to whom do you leave your kingdom? The dying Alexander, according to legend, whispered one word: kratistoi, to the strongest. Now let's break down what he meant. Was it an admission that only the most powerful could hold what he had conquered? Or was it his final, most cynical prophecy? Perhaps what he knew about his generals was a death sentence for the empire. He understood their ambitions, their envy, and their ruthlessness perfectly. He appointed no successor, possibly because he considered no one his equal. That word, to the strongest, was not a last will and testament, but a starting pistol. Immediately after his death began the bloodiest Game of Thrones of the ancient world, the 40-year-long wars of the Diadochi. His empire was torn to pieces. His mother, Olympias, his wife, Roxana, and his son, the young Alexander IV, would all be brutally murdered in this struggle for power. So let's bring it all together. We saw how a young man, raised on the myth of his divine origin, acquired superhuman ambition. We saw how that ambition and his military genius allowed him to crush the world's greatest empire at Gaugamela. Then we understood that he was not just a destroyer. He became the first globalist, attempting to fuse civilizations by force. But it was this very obsession that brought him to his limit in India, where reality, in the form of his exhausted army, told him no. And finally, his death and his fatal testament to the strongest destroyed his empire as a single entity, proving that it had been a state of one man. Alexander the Great's empire died with him, but his legacy proved more enduring. He didn't just conquer the world, he irreversibly mixed it, creating a new Hellenistic world upon whose foundations Rome would later rise. But his death is not the end of the story, only its bloody beginning. This was the first episode of our series, and the chaos he left behind gave birth to new titans. In the next installment, we will begin the story of the Wars of the Diadochi and explore how one of his closest bodyguards, Ptolemy, became the pharaoh of Egypt by pulling off the most audacious heist in history, the kidnapping of Alexander's own body.